Reinforcements have arrived.
Reporting affirmative.
It started with a handshake and ended with a most excellent cup of tea, but the real treat was the stuff in between. Red Alert had one of the finest and most memorable single-player experiences of the first wave of RTS games, and as it's 30 years old this year, I think we should dive in and take a look at what made that campaign great. Hi, I'm Calivan, and welcome to part 2 of the Red Alert 30th celebration. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at the campaign, the missions, the units, and everything that stitched them together. In its boxed state, Red Alert included 2 primary campaigns, one for the Allies and one for the Soviets. In what appeared to be a Cold War gone hot, your job as the commander is to either stop the Red Tide from taking over Europe or to help that tide along its way. But it's a little more complex than that. As the top commander in the field, you get only the most important jobs, so your missions tend to have slightly more timely objectives. Both campaigns can be roughly considered as a story in 3 acts. The first act is generally an introduction to the cast and your job as the new commander. You're given some simple yet important objectives to complete, and as you proceed, you win favour with your bosses, gain promotions, and are trusted with the more important stuff. In the second act, each faction is fighting to gain technological superiority. These missions tend to be focused on the 2 super weapons and the technology behind them. For the Allies, this is the Chronosphere, a sort of time-shifting teleport device, and for the Soviets, it's the Iron Curtain, a limited invulnerability machine. The third act leads up to the finale and has bigger battles that represent conquest of important regions. That's only a very general split, but you get the picture. The first few missions are very quick and can be completed in a few minutes, so think of them as a tutorial in all but name. They don't have any special instructions or help tips, but there's little time pressure or much in the way of aggression, so you can spend as long as you want learning the controls and playing around. It's a great way to introduce a player, and I think it's both effective and a lot more fun than a tightly scripted tutorial. For millions of people, this was their first RTS, and the whole genre was only 4 years old. Yet still this hands-off approach was perfectly acceptable. It does make you wonder why 8 years later Supreme Commander 2 felt it necessary to spend 10 minutes teaching you how to select a unit or pan the camera.
Let's start with panning, also known as scrolling.
Units are introduced to the player gradually as the campaign progresses. The initial list is pretty lightweight, a couple of foot soldiers, the odd vehicle, and the basic production buildings to create them. After that, they use a predictable but perfectly suitable formula. You'll have a mission where a section of it requires the special talents of a new unit. You're furnished with a few of them and then have to use them to complete that objective. Now that's done, the creators feel that you understand and appreciate this new unit, and then you can generally tech up and produce it in the normal way from the next mission onwards. It worked well in Command & Conquer, and it works just as well in Red Alert. You learn as you play, and by the time you're nearing the end of the campaign, you've got the full toolkit at your disposal. As well as the 2 primary campaigns, there's an additional secret campaign. Well, I say secret, but it's the worst kept secret in strategy gaming history. Even at the time, knowledge of it was widespread, and in many circles it was actually expected. It's so well known that in most discussions it actually overshadows its predecessor. Command & Conquer also had a secret campaign, commonly known as Fun Park, which saw your forces do battle with dinosaurs over a set of 4 or 5 missions. It was originally an inaccessible Easter egg included in the base game files, but became more widely playable after the release of the Covert Operations expansion. It was both an intended and an unintended feature. Lead developer Joe Bostic started working on it, and then as other developers noticed it, they all started contributing their own additions. Brett Sperry, the project lead, had no idea it existed, but it kept growing until it got out of hand, and well, I'll let developer William Randolph tell you the rest.
And then the video guys got involved and made a whole video. And at this point, Joe and I realized Brett still didn't know about this. And when he found out, we didn't know what was going to happen. And we were both really scared about what was going to happen because we were ending up using company resources on this dumb little toy. So one day in QA, a bug caused that sidebar art to reveal. And suddenly the sidebar became a big dinosaur head, and Brett was there when it happened. He was pretty mad. He pulled Joe into his office, and they closed the door, and I don't know what all was said, But when Joe came out, he looked pretty shaken. And I said, Joe, what happened? And Joe said, we're pulling it all out. We're taking it all out. It's just gone. And so we gave Brett some time to cool off. I just pleaded with him, and he basically said, okay, but you have to do it all yourself, and you have to do it all in your spare time. You cannot impact the game with this. I said, okay.
The fans love this sort of stuff, so during Red Alert's development, they added a It Came From Red Alert mini-campaign where you take on hordes of giant ants. This time you didn't need to hack the game files or use some sort of command line switch to activate it, but instead shift-click the speaker on the main screen and away you went. What's nice about this gimmick is it's not really that much of a gimmick. The missions are well designed, hard as nails, and can take several attempts to complete even on normal difficulty. Future expansions brought in extra campaigns, but before we talk about those, I want to talk about a couple of features that were pretty unique in the first decade of RTS games. Red Alert expanded on the mission choice element of Command & Conquer. I'm sure we all remember the little map where you get to pick the location of your next battle. Well, in Red Alert, about a third of the missions actually have a different version. These have got the same objectives and generally the same units and challenges, but the map and layout are unique. This is the 5th mission of the Allied campaign and it's got 3 different versions. You still have to get your spy into a factory, hijack a truck, rescue Tanya, and then build a base and eliminate the enemy. But each version has a very different layout. It's such a great addition, it gives the player a bit of choice and something that helps you feel more in control. It makes subsequent playthroughs a little more interesting. The second addition, which I'm pretty sure was unique to Red Alert, is that a couple of the missions actually have a persistent state. The units that you built and the buildings you saved are still around when you revisit the map later on in the campaign, even though it's a new mission and the map forms a small part of a larger game area. The first time you notice it, it changes your mindset, and when you're playing a mission, you're not just trying to achieve the objectives at any cost, but also finish in a strong position in case you happen to return. When someone invents a new mechanic, you'd think you'd see it everywhere, but I can only actually think of 2 instances where they used it, which is the 4th Allied mission and the 2nd Ant mission. Bit strange that they didn't make a bit more of it. How you personally remember the expansions really depends on what version of the game you played. In the initially released Counter-Strike and Aftermath, each disc came with 16 extra standalone missions, 8 for the Allies and 8 for the Soviets. For the PlayStation, these were all bundled together and sold as a standalone game called Red Alert Retaliation, which included new FMV cutscenes to stitch them all together into a campaign. This is how they're presented in the 2020 remaster, complete with the video that accompanied the PlayStation release. Only about a third of the missions actually have video briefings, but I think it results in a far better experience than what you got with the original expansions. Since I just mentioned it, I guess I should say a few words about it. The 2020 remaster of Command & Conquer and Red Alert is a joy to behold. If you want to play these games in the modern day, then this is the way to do it. Sorry First Decade, sorry OpenRA, I love you, I really do, but the 2020 release is an absolute masterpiece. And it's easy to see why. It was created by Petrograph Games, a company founded by Westwood's lead programmer Joe Bostic. So many of the original key players had a hand in it. It's exactly what you want from a modern remaster. It feels and plays just like the original, works perfectly on modern hardware, and has just enough quality of life additions to make you feel comfortable. I'm not always a fan of how some modern remasters turn out, but this is one of the very best, and I think it's right up there with the 2015 Homeworld Remaster Collection in terms of overall quality and staying true to the original. One thing Red Alert did very well at is missions within missions. There are a handful that feature a single style and objective, but many of them consist of 2 or 3 tasks that come together to form a complete package. The 5th Allied mission that I talked about earlier is a great example of this, and it's essentially a mission in 2 halves. The first part is covert. You use your spy to sneak past the guard dogs and into a base, you release Tanya, blow up some SAM sites, and then she flies away in a helicopter. Once this is complete, your MCV arrives, and you need to get set up, build up an army, and eliminate the enemy base. Not all of the missions have stages that are that clearly defined, but generally there's a checklist of things that must be completed for you to be able to proceed. In fact, very few of them are as simple as building a base and crushing the enemy. Your opponent will often have 1 or 2 smaller satellite bases defending bridges or crossings or protecting access to the coastline. Following on from the Tanya mission, you've got to establish a base on one shore, kill a small enemy base, build a shipyard at the beach, and then use your landing craft to stage an assault on the main island. Naval elements were all new in Red Alert. We did get to see the odd boat in Command & Conquer, but we never got to control one. These additions are fun, and it's interesting that they decided to take an asymmetrical approach to that side of things. Both sides get access to the landing craft, but the Allies get gunboats, cruisers and destroyers, while the Soviets only have access to the submarine. There was actually a missile submarine added in one of the expansions, but in the base game the sole purpose of the Soviet Navy is to defend the coastal areas from Allied ships. I guess this also explains the imbalance in air power, and why the Soviets get ground attack planes and the Allies do not. This whole new naval element is something that features very heavily in the campaign. Many of the missions include a liberal usage of landing craft. As the player, you're often required to shuttle troops between land masses, and the scripted opponent will frequently use landing craft to deploy attack waves on your home island. It's one of the things that makes Red Alert feel like a new game rather than just another expansion. The naval aspect is an integral part of gameplay, and it's an element you'll find yourself frequently interacting with. They also make good use of it in the FMV, which makes a lot of sense as I think it's universally accepted that submarines are cool and battleships are awesome. Now, I feel like I should talk about the FMV cutscenes some more, but it's hard to say something about them that hasn't already been said so many times before. They are probably more famous than the actual gameplay itself, and were a standout feature at the time. Many games included CGI video, but because it was expensive, time-consuming and used up a lot of space, it was generally restricted to game and campaign introductions. What really set Red Alert apart from other strategy games at the time was that every single mission was bookended by several minutes of video. The inclusion of real actors instead of voiceovers or generated heads really gave the game life. I've grabbed a selection of other titles from the time, and looking at the pre-mission briefings you can really see the difference. This isn't a random group of mediocre games, this is some of the best releases from the second half of that decade. Warcraft 2, Total Annihilation, KKND 2, Dark Colony, Battlezone and StarCraft. The final one did have a bit of extra footage smattered about, but honestly it's pretty bland stuff. The combination of CGI backdrops and real actors resulted in such great scenes, and the games that embraced that method are still memorable today because of it. It looked like it was going to be a really big deal, and for the short period where 3D rendering was wholly unrealistic and more expensive than casting and filming, quite a few games embraced it with amazing results. The video in the background right now is the opening scene from Mech Commander, which I think is one of the best out there. I know it sounds silly, but honestly this scene still gives me chills. I think the reason that this era was rather short-lived is that many of the studios tried to go a little too hard and ended up spending way too much money. Hollywood actors, reams of extras, elaborate sets, all elements that drove the production cost up and up. That's Mark Hamill and Malcolm McDowell in Wing Commander 3 from '94. That's Tom Wilson in Wing Commander 5 and John Hurt and Clive Owen in Privateer 2 The Darkening. It seems like some of these studios forgot they were actually making video game cutscenes and started trying to make movies instead. After a while, rendering got better and cheaper, and most studios just didn't see the point in hiring actors for anything other than their voice or their motion capture potential. Westwood's successes in this area during the mid-90s was down to their process. They employed their own video director that had a line on local talent and could keep the casting and shooting all in-house. Rather than paying out big money for known faces, they used a mix of amateurs and semi-professionals for all of the main roles, and then staff members for extras. Starting with Tiberium's Son, this would all change, and the games that followed Red Alert would feature James L. Jones, Tim Curry, Michael Ironside, George Takei, and what felt like half of the cast of Battlestar Galactica. I can only imagine what this did to production budgets, and every dollar you spend on one thing is a dollar you can't spend somewhere else.
Good afternoon, Commander.
This here is one of the later Soviet missions, and I think it serves as a good demonstration of how many of the campaign missions play out. The end goal is to capture all of the tech centres on the top right island, but there are several things you must do first in order to achieve success. It starts out with a small enemy base and a scripted airstrike. You've got a handful of troops and vehicles, and they push into an enemy base, flatten it, and then you set up your MCV. The primary problem here is that you've not got a lot to start with, and anytime you push out near the ore spots, you're bombarded by enemy cruisers who sail around the map in a circle. Once you're established, you've got to build towards the water, get a sub-pen up and build enough submarines to counter these cruisers. At the same time, you've got to fend off some attacks, Chinooks full of soldiers, some small waves, and a particularly annoying mine layer that starts sowing death seeds where you want your harvesters to go. Now that you're established and no longer under the constant threat of bombardment, you move into the second phase. The enemy base at the bottom has quite a few defences, so you need a decent sized army to crack it. And it's hard to assemble such a force as they keep up the pressure with waves of tanks and infantry. There are several possible options, but if in doubt, creeping closer and closer towards them using mammoth tanks and missile trucks is always a good option. Mammoth tanks are expensive, but they self-repair up to 50% health, so if used carefully they can be very efficient. Once you get close enough, you'll be able to both protect your own harvesters and destroy those of your enemy. Then it's just a case of taking your time and pushing into the base. For the final phase, the easiest way is to capture the enemy construction yard and use it to build a cruiser and a couple of destroyers. You can use these to explode the bulk of the defences on the island without much in the way of retaliation, and the destroyers have good enough anti-air to deal with the attack choppers. From this point, completing the mission requires an amphibious assault that includes enough engineers to capture the 3 tech centres. Like most missions, a lot of the difficulty comes from learning the challenge and planning accordingly. If you're unfamiliar with the mission, then it's very easy to get tripped up by the unexpected. And if you forgot to make a couple of manual saves mid-mission, then you'll probably end up kicking yourself. These days it's generally frowned upon to throw sudden, unexpected loss conditions at a player. It's a fast track to frustration and gives a feeling that you've been cheated. But back in 1996, Westwood didn't have a lot of choice. You see, early RTS AI was pretty basic. It wasn't that programmers were bad, it's just that personal computers were. In 1996, the latest top-of-the-range processor was probably something like one of the new Pentium MMX chips, which ran at 166 MHz. But that's the very top end. The average player was probably on something like one of the older 486DX chips, which only ran at 66 MHz. That's not a lot of processing power to go around. This is also back in the day where the CPU had to do all of the graphical rendering, as graphics cards were solely focused on putting pixels on screens rather than creating those pixels. Combine this with the game engine, media handling and unit pathfinding, and there isn't a whole lot left for the opposing computer brain. In real-time games, developers generally use 3 methods to present a challenge: handicaps, cheats, or additional scripted events. The handicap method was favoured by many, and essentially it just made the enemy units tougher and cost less resources. It didn't matter that the computer opponent just threw them straight at your base, because it could make up for stupidity with quantity. The second method is probably the least satisfying to play against, and that is to cheat so much that the AI is essentially playing a different game. Empire Earth is probably the most widely known example. It didn't even use the resource system. It could build anything it wanted without cost. Units would train almost instantly and structures could be built in a fraction of the usual time. It also had complete map vision, and it would use that to find the one tiny unguarded route to your important buildings and send a wave of free attackers directly to them. Westwood went with the third route. You would be playing against a basic AI that had to collect resources and build units just as you did. Well, almost. It wouldn't expand its base, but it would be allowed to rebuild destroyed structures in the same spaces if you destroyed them. On top of this, there would be events that fired either on a timer or with a certain trigger that kept you on your toes. In the mission we just looked at, the opponent gathers resources, builds units, and then sends them in waves towards your base. You have some agency here, and you can reduce the frequency of attacks by interfering with their harvesting efforts. There's also a Chinook drop at the top of the map just after the mission starts, and then other drops on a regular timer. Most missions work this way, so you're up against the basic AI, plus a selection of set events that are completely unpredictable the first time you play a mission. It's a bit different from the games we often see today, but available technology dictated the possible design decisions in these matters. Strategy games from this era were built around something that we can call mastery through failure. They lacked tutorials, objective markers, detailed instructions and autosaves. Players were expected to experiment, fail often, and then gradually build up an understanding of the challenge and the best way to defeat it. The challenges didn't come from a requirement to execute a series of actions in perfect fashion or an ability to respond to ever-changing threats, but instead from a lack of knowledge. This is why there were so many strategy guides published for these games. If you knew what to do, then the actual execution was relatively straightforward. As we approached the 2010s, design philosophy seemed to have shifted a great deal. Technology had come a long way, and developers were really proud of the high spectacle and quality of storytelling that they were now able to produce. They were desperate to show off their epic scenes and set pieces, which I've always felt led to a tendency to take the player by the hand and guide them through the game. They started to use terms like cinematic experience, checkpoints became frequent, and unless you purposefully ramped up the difficulty to unfair levels, then progress was almost guaranteed. Thankfully, these days is a bit more of a balance. The popularity of single-save hardcore modes and games like Dark Souls show that guided play is not everyone's cup of tea, and that the learning experience is not only enjoyable and rewarding, but ends up with you spending a lot more time playing the game that you forked over $60 or $70 for. Now, before we talk about a terrible mission that I hate, I think it would be interesting to touch on the AI that was included with Red Alert. It used a state-based system that allowed the AI to look at a load of variables that were set throughout the game to give itself one of several predefined plans. It had two sorts of different thoughts available to it: strategies and missions. Missions are the tasks it assigns to individual units. They represent the sort of orders a human player would give. So a mission might be something like drive towards the enemy harvester and attack it. How the unit actually gets there is not something the mission AI is concerned with, and that's where the individual unit AI takes over and handles things like pathfinding. If you've played Red Alert, you'll know that the pathfinding is terrible. But again, it's not because the developers were dumb. There were plenty of good pathfinding algorithms available. For instance, A-Star was first proposed way back in 1968, but as we mentioned before, the limitations of early processors placed limits on what was feasible. Instead, Red Alert uses a very cheap method called crash and turn. The unit moves on a direct path towards a destination. If it reaches impassable terrain, it will make a turn and then move along the obstacle until it is once again able to move forward towards its goal. Once you know this, it's impossible not to see it in action, and you can frequently watch your units sort of feel their way around the cliffs and rivers until they find a suitable direct path. There are some 20-odd different missions that AI can assign to units, things like Hunt, Guard, and the frequently used Do Nothing. If a unit completes a mission, it will often return to the previous task. You can watch this yourself by attacking an ore truck belonging to your opponent. A bunch of units that were previously sitting in the base, currently doing nothing, will suddenly rush out and engage anything in vicinity of the harvester. Once the threat is over, they will immediately go back to what they were previously doing. Strategies are at a much higher level than missions, and there are something like 5 of them in total. These are build up, broke, threatened, attacked, and endgame. The default is build up, in which it will gather resources, produce units, and that sort of thing. When it's broke, i.e. unable to receive income, it will act a little differently, and when it's attacked, it will prioritise things like repairs and defensive units. Endgame is a state that I bet you've all seen before. This is where it can no longer produce units or gather resources. It will immediately sell all of its buildings and then send all of the resulting inventory and anything else it has left on a desperate do-or-die attack. Overall, it's a very basic system, but along with the scripted events, it makes a perfectly serviceable opponent, and the missions within the campaign are challenging and a lot of fun. Well, most of them are. See, there's one thing I hate in RTS campaigns, and that's when they give you a handful of regular infantry and make you do a quasi-real-time tactics style mission within an RTS engine. If they're done particularly well, and few and far between, I'll let it slide. But if they are fiddly and frequent, then I find them very frustrating, and when I'm done with one of them, I feel a great wave of relief that it's over rather than any sort of satisfaction. This brings us to Focused Blast, the 13th mission of the Allied campaign. Now, I do see what they tried to do. They wanted to make something a bit different, something that stood out from the other missions in the campaign, and something that was very different from the content that was included with Command & Conquer. I applaud creativity and attempts to add a bit of variety. But that said, I hate this mission. It opens well. Look, it's director Joe Kukin in a ski mask taking out composer Frank Kaplacki. What's not to like? Okay, so first we go forward. Oh no, we've lost too many guys to a flame turret, try again. Now we've realised we can walk here and deactivate that, great. Oh no, we've lost a guy, and another, and now there's no way we can win. The primary problem with this mission is there's absolutely no hope of recovery. One tiny slip up and you've lost. You've got to have at least 3 soldiers and a medic alive in each section, or you can't take out the 2 or 3 man patrols without dipping below this critical mass. Worse than that, each new tiny area contains a surprise you cannot plan for, like a guard dog that leaps out of the fog of war and immediately kills a soldier with a single bite. The whole mission is like this. Move a tiny bit, engage 2 soldiers, stop, heal up, wait, move another tiny bit, engage another soldier, heal up, wait, etc, etc. It's slow, grueling and no fun at all. I love Red Alert and I love a challenge, but if this was the last time I ever had to play this mission or one like it, then I'd be a happy man. It's worth noting that there is a similar indoorsy mission on the Soviet side, but it's not half as bad. I don't mean it's good, but it's mercifully short and doesn't get to me in the same sort of way. But Focus Blast aside, the rest of the campaign is solid. The introductory missions are quick and easy, but give you enough time to learn a few things. The main bulk are beefy enough to provide a decent challenge and varied enough that it doesn't feel like a slog. New units are introduced as you proceed, so you get a real sense of progression, and it does feel pretty satisfying when you finally get to produce your own powerful air and sea units in quantity. What's interesting about Red Alert is how relatively mundane all of the individual units are. When you think about Red Alert, you might think of Tesla troopers, chrono or prism tanks, sonic dolphins, demo trucks and all manner of other weird and wacky contraptions. But none of these were present in the base game. Some of them were added with Counter-Strike or Aftermath, and many of them in future games. Those in the original are relatively normal. You've got dudes with guns, grenades, rockets and flamethrowers. There's a few tanks, and although they vary in size and number of barrels, they're still all moving on tracks and firing cannons. No mind control, no chemical weapons, and the closest thing to invisibility is when a submarine dives under the water. By my count, there are 9 buildable infantry, 11 vehicle, 5 aircraft and 5 ships, for a total of 30 between both factions. Some of them, like the rifleman, engineer, ore truck, mine layers, jammers and other various transports, are available for both sides, so each faction only has around a dozen unique units. That's really not that many, but somehow it feels like enough. I think it's down to good design that you have the tactical variety you do with such a small toolkit. The only time that you feel particularly lacking in the campaign is when you're playing the Soviets and you don't have any good mobile anti-air options. But I get the feeling that this is an intentional design decision to encourage you to use MiGs in an anti-air role. Weird and wacky units are a lot of fun in the short term, but I'm not sure they should form the backbone of normal play. Even the units introduced in the expansions are still relatively tame and could be thought of as extensions to the capabilities already provided by iconic structures such as the Chronosphere and Tesla Coil. But they all work very well and they're perfectly suited to the challenges you face. So I guess that sums up the Red Alert campaigns, and what a glorious experience they are. Fun story, memorable characters, great gameplay and enough content to really get stuck into. HowLongToBeat.com lists Red Alert as having the longest average playtime of all the CNC games. Most are in the 15 to 25 hour range, but Red Alert sits at the top with 27.5, so you certainly got your money's worth. I also enjoy the fact that Command & Conquer 4 only has 8 hours. I imagine that's something you want to rush through in a single day so you can put it out of your mind before you go to bed. In fact, I'm surprised that anyone could stomach a full 8 hours of it. That's enough Red Alert for today, although I think I will return with another video in the near future, as it would be good to look at how Red Alert influenced the games that were to follow. In the meantime, I'm off to have a crack at the Retaliation campaign. I guess I could make a let's play, but who wants to watch an old man slowly misclick units for 3 hours? But anyway, let's see what General Carville has to say.
A man getting a horse.
Think you can remember that?
Hi there, thanks for watching. If you thought this video was sort of better than okay, then click the like button. And tell me about your best and worst missions in the comments. And if you want more of this sort of thing, then subscribe to my channel and I hope to see you back soon.